Okay, so I'm going to build off Stephen's excellent presentation. This is using AI for mission-critical production systems. So my name's Duncan Winn. I've been in production engineering, site reliability engineering for a number of years, in fact, decades. Currently, I run SRE production engineering at Zscaler. My journey in reliability started over 20 years ago in IBM. Back then, we called it RAS, Reliability, Availability, Serviceability. I used to take care of J9 and the WebSphere stack. Before joining Zscaler, I used to run Google's storage infrastructure. So arguably, this is the largest storage system on the planet. It's hundreds of exabytes. Because it's so large, we could afford 15 nines of durability in terms of our durability commitment. But also, because it's so large, when Google storage has a problem, because all Google services are built on that, like search, apps, photos, YouTube, and Drive, when we had an outage, it typically made the news. And so it's kind of exhilarating working on something so large and complex. And even in Zscaler, it's a large global platform. Okay, so before I dive deep into the details of why we chose Resolve and what we're doing with it, I want to address what I imagine is a burning question for folks, which is, why would we look at AI for prod in the first place? To answer this, I want to go back to a quote I came across over 20 years ago from Brian Cunningham. If anyone doesn't know Brian Cunningham, he's an early Unix developer, was very vocal and wrote a book on C with his counterpart Richie. So debugging, it's twice as hard as writing code in the first place. And therefore, if you write code as cleverly as possible, you are by definition not smart enough to debug it. And the reason I like this is there's this tension, or there was back in sort of 20 years ago, between dev and ops, where the developers would throw it over this wall of confusion and just expect things to work. And we all know operating production is actually really challenging. And so this resonated. So I updated this for now, here and today, which is debugging isn't just twice as hard, but it's an order of magnitude harder than vibe coding in the first place. So if you vibe code as quickly as possible, you are by definition going to be spending a lot longer debugging in production. And why this is important, it's a lot longer, the time we spend debugging that Zscaler and my team really care about. So we are customer obsessed. We really care about reducing that customer pain. And we measure customer pain by the mean time to detect. How do we detect an issue? And then mean time to mitigate. How do we mitigate that pain? We don't have to fully solve it, but we want to take away the customer pain as quickly as possible. And so this is why we embarked on Gen AI and started working with Resolve to compress those time windows. Okay, so I need to spend some time giving you a little bit of context on Zscaler. This is not a product pitch, but you need to understand what Zscaler is to understand some of the complexity and why we went with Resolve. So Zscaler, it's a zero trust exchange. And what that means effectively is we stop bad things happening. We try and block the bad, whether that's a user going to a virus, and we try and protect the good. For example, stopping someone exfiltrating customer or company information. Whatever that may be, we try and really protect customers' ecosystems. And that means we sit on the critical path for virtually all their traffic, all their IoT traffic, all their user traffic, every other workload. And whether it's going to the internet, some SaaS application, or some public or private data center, we sit on that critical path. And customers have told us, if Microsoft goes down or if Salesforce goes down, they can still do work. But if Zscaler goes down, they're completely blocked. And so they need us to be up and available. And so we take reliability as a #1 priority in line with our security commitments. So we've established it's on the critical path. What this means for our user base, we have over 9,000 entities we call customers. It translates to 50 million users daily. We deal with around 500 billion transactions, so this huge volume of transactions, and we block around 9 billion bad things happening on a daily basis. So significant scale. And of those 500 billion transactions, it's supported by over 150,000 nodes in our data centers, We have 160 data centers globally, so this global footprint. The scale isn't really the challenge. I mean, many companies have dealt with large planet scale. What's unique for us is our bespoke systems. We have a lot of bare metal, a custom networking stack, a custom OS, everything we've built internally. And then we also have Kubernetes, we have hypervisors, we run on every single public cloud. So we have this huge amount of complexity into our ecosystem. And the reason I call this out is it's easy to think Gen AI is great for a modern microservices, Kubernetes-based application because it can understand Kubernetes dialects. But we found that even in these complex bespoke systems, as long as you can get some meaningful data to Resolve can do some really interesting things with it. So I'm going to touch very quickly, picking up where Stephen left off on production challenges. This is a generic slide, because it came from Resolve originally, and also this has been my experience in every single company I've worked for and every customer I've worked with, that they have inefficient workflows that can impact revenue, and that costs them on a daily basis. In the interest of time, because I could talk for hours on this stuff, I'm going to touch on 3 that really resonated. So changes take a long time to get deployed, and they trigger issues. And we all know that when you roll out a change, it can cause a problem, and so you look at your monitoring and your metrics and roll back. But I found in these large-scale distributed environments that it can take a number of months for the change to actually show up as a problem. You have a unique customer workload or a unique environmental aspect or configuration, and then 6 months later, it can trigger an issue. And you look at what changed, you have to go quite far back to actually see the underlying trigger. Customers report issues before we discover them. Again, as someone who's customer obsessed, this is really bad. And an analogy I really like, I was watching Harry Potter with my kids and I was trying to get it working, and for about the first minute, we just had this buffering issue. So I bounced my browser, restarted it, and it worked. A day later, Prime Video reached out to me and said, "Hey customer, we noticed you had an issue watching this video and we're going to give you a credit and we're going to refund your money." That level of customer focus, if we can bring that to the enterprise, if we can understand acutely where our customers are seeing pain and then address it, it's going to be a material difference for them. And the last one, it takes 3 to 6 months for new engineers to onboard. I think that's an understatement. Like when I've worked on these systems, after 6 months, people are still terrified going on call. They're terrified about making mistakes or making the wrong judgment call. If they can have an AI buddy along that journey with them and a system that they can start to interrogate, both to learn, ask questions, and get some grounding, it's really material in easing some of those nerves of going on call. Okay, so this is the generic slide of pain. But there's even more pain which we've seen on a daily basis. And actually, it's not just cost. It's about the developer velocity. It's about your well-being as a person. If you're getting paged at 3 a.m., spending 4 hours on a bridge, you're not going to be at your best on the next day. It also impacts collaboration across teams if you haven't got the right insights or mechanics in place. And ultimately, it impacts the effectiveness of an organization. So a couple of things I want to call out here. Support. We talk a lot about production engineering and SRE. What I've observed is support, they can over-escalate. They can have a customer screaming down the phone at them, and they think this is really important. So they escalate, they get everyone on a bridge at 3 in the morning, and they get shouted at. "This is a tiny bug. Why did you escalate this issue? Can't you see it's really trivial? The customer's just holding it wrong." And they also under-escalate. They think, last time I had an issue, everyone shouted at me, so I'm going to make really sure that this issue is a proper issue before I escalate. And by the time they escalate, they get shouted at, "The cloud's down, all of our customers are in pain. How could you wait 2 hours to escalate this issue?" It's really tough. Where I see Resolve impacting us, because we have a degree of contextual knowledge in Resolve, you now have a production interface where any engineer, be it a support engineer, an SRE, or a developer, can ask Resolve questions. Have we seen this before? What feature flags were turned on? What severity is this likely to be? Who else is experiencing this issue? And they can start to gather this information and make a judgment call more accurately. The last thing I want to highlight here, incident follow-up requires 10x the amount of effort. So anyone who's got on-call experience, you jump on a bridge, you root cause, you have a working theory, you identify and fix or mitigate the issue. The cleanup is a huge body of work. There's a post-mortem. With that post-mortem, there's post-mortem action items. Those post-mortem action items can turn into large bodies of work to close down a risk vector. So they tend to be squeezed into a risk register. That risk register captures all of the post-mortem action items that have ever occurred. If you can get AI to assess this, you can start to look at correlation. Where else have you seen this issue before? What post-mortem action item is going to have the best bang for buck? Maintaining a risk register is hard. And if we can actually use AI to help us get a better handle on what's critical, it's a huge bonus. So when I bring this back to Zscaler, what does this look like for us in terms of production pain? We have over 400,000 alerts every single month. Now that's an eye-watering amount. I'm using the word alert very loosely here. Some of these are just notifications. Some of them are from pager storms or repeat issues. The challenge with 400,000 being so high, it's not tractable for a human being. A human cannot look at this sea of alerts and work out what's actionable and what should we pay attention to versus what's just noise or information. We found that by piping some of these alerts to Resolve's auto-resolution capability, we can start to assess and get more accuracy on what alerts we should be paying attention to. And so there's a feedback loop as we start to interact with Resolve that allows us to get a handle on some of the complexity here. This then moves into approximately 120 incidents a month. Again, it sounds a lot. Most of these are on the sort of Sev 3, Sev 4. The Sev 1 and Sev 2s are very rare. But it's also the less impactful incidents that take a lot of work. They're obscure. They often involve one customer, one usage pattern. And still it takes 20 plus engineers, way more than an hour often. And there's a lot of effort there that's needed. And so anything we can do coming back to reducing that customer pain makes a big difference. So working on prod, and I'm sure this is familiar for many other folks. What it looks like right now, we have an incident. It will fire through our Slack channel and our incident management tooling. An engineer, so we have Chris Umble in the audience. He's one of my team. He actually built the original version of this slide. The engineers on my team will be paged often at crazy times, and they will look acutely at where the incident resides, and they'll start with the team exhibiting a problem. Often as the incident progresses, they will start to work through other teams. Maybe it's a networking issue, maybe it's a backend database problem, and they'll page additional teams onto the bridge. Each team we page, there's more and more people joining, there's more voices and more theories, and it can get really complex, which is why we have seasoned senior engineers take on this role. On the bottom tier, there's all the observability they also have to pull in. They have to try and diagnose what the root cause is, all the change events from our CI/CD pipeline and all of our custom tools and code. So they have to grab all this together, come up with a working theory in a sea of information and a number of voices on the bridge. They have to manage expectations, ensure we're mitigating as best as possible, and it's a really challenging role. Where we'd like to get to is an engineer gets paged, an engineer talks to Resolve. Resolve presents a working theory, not just something broke, but exactly what broke and what the potential root causes are with a bunch of citations so that engineer can make an informed decision and hopefully apply some generic mitigations so that they can alleviate customer pain, go back to sleep, and then in the morning when all the engineers are there, in business hours, we can have that post-mortem and put some more rigorous fixes in place for the long term. But it doesn't matter waiting because the customer pain has been alleviated. So when we evaluated AI solutions, what we were looking for specifically from Resolve, as I mentioned, Zscaler is on the critical path. It's large scale and it's complex. So we needed to see something working in our environment. We didn't trust it just to understand Kubernetes and Kubernetes dialogues. We needed to make sure it really understood our metrics. So it had to easily connect and integrate with our logs, our metrics, our traces, Slack, all of our knowledge bases. We needed to see it auto-triage and investigate events. We needed to see not just the what broke, but why did something break and what was the root cause? Where is the line of breadcrumbs to that thing that we need to fix to mitigate the pain? And also, as I mentioned, we need to see it work at scale in this hybrid complex environment. The last thing, and there's a load of fuss in LinkedIn and in the news on is AI going to take my job? At no point were we looking at using Resolve to replace SREs or production engineers. What we are looking for is, can Resolve go through that well-trodden path, the toil that the engineers need to go through to discover the logs, to discover the lines in code which need changing, can Resolve do that far quicker for an engineer and present that working hypothesis so that our smart engineers can do less toil and be more effective. So this, again, is all about compressing time and making our team more effective, enabling the smart engineers to actually do their job really effectively. And so what we saw in a POC, and we saw this from a number of different scenarios, this is a key one I really like because Chris was actually on call at the time. We saw an issue where an alert came to Resolve. Resolve auto-investigated the alert and found out it looks like your customers are having a bad time, there's device registration failures, and it's nothing to do with the front end, it's actually to do with a DNS resolution error in the back end. Because we were doing a POC, this happened in a certain channel, and we were paying attention to our incident mechanics. So an incident fired 2 hours later, and we looked at the incident and thought, what does Resolve think? And worked out Resolve saw the issue 2 hours before our own alerting and our own tooling. And so this was that light bulb moment where we thought, if you plumb the metrics into Resolve in the right way, this is absolutely going to help us with that mean time to detect. And also, because it showed us the root cause, the mean time to mitigate. So where this is going for us in the future, I mentioned on average, it takes about an hour, a bunch of engineers join a call and spend all that time mitigating. We really would like to drive that down to 15 minutes, so 75% reduction in time to mitigate. That's a very audacious goal, but we believe if we incorporate the right workflows, we're going to get there. We also, and I can't stress this enough, want fewer engineers. The less engineers joining a bridge, the less noise, the less chaos, the less the bridge is pulled into all sorts of directions. And also, we want the engineers to be productive, doing what they love to do, which is write code and build great products. And the more we can keep their focus on building products and not pulling them into incident bridges, the better for everyone. So I'm going to leave you with this last slide. Where is all this going? If you look on the left-hand side, we can do this today. We know that ResolveAI can automatically investigate alerts and help engineers with a fix. We've seen ample evidence internally of that. And we also know that Resolve can act as a chat capability like an AI buddy where you can ask questions, you can debug, and you can also interrogate production and ask it to give you architecture diagrams and explain unique concepts, and that's super valuable. On the right-hand side, where this is going, I can see this as like a dialect and an interface for all of production. So I can see us using Resolve for our data center and our network metrics, looking at utilization, looking at efficiency, seeing if it can propose intelligent ideas on how to become more efficient. I look at this and think we can use it for enhanced analysis. So our security team are interested in looking at Resolve to augment our threat detection. We're looking at potentially modeling chaos engineering. If we want to shut down a data center, what would happen to the traffic? What would happen to the latency? Do we need to shift additional capacity in other areas to prepare for disasters? We talked a little bit about having an expert technical lead you can tap up at any point. We do something we pulled from Google, which is called a Wheel of Misfortune. It's a scenario-based exercise where you go through a mock incident. To build those mock incidents takes a couple of weeks. You have to go and find all the dashboards and build the scenario. And I look at Resolve as we go through an incident. If we could just click a button and capture that flow and replay that flow for a newer engineer, that's a very effective way of allowing that engineer to experience an incident. And I can imagine a world where we start with a new joiner, you give the new joiner 100 prompts and they go and just interrogate Resolve for a couple of days to really understand how production works. And then finally, we're very good at giving Resolve structured data, our logs, our metrics, our traces. But I'm interested, and Chris and I have been riffing about this for some time, what if you could give all of the information about our incident lifecycle, our risk management capability, if it could start to identify gaps in our observability dashboards and our strategy? That would be really exciting. So just to recap, we started with Resolve to really drive down that mean time to mitigate, mean time to detect. And as an SRE, this is an area I'm really passionate about. But there's a whole host of other things that have really piqued our interest that we're very excited to explore as well. And so with that, I'll open up back to Stephen, I think. All right. Okay.
We also have, well, if you have questions, Duncan said yes, that he would love some Q&A. So does anyone have any questions for Duncan? Awesome. Thank you for being, Christoph, thank you for being the brave soul.
So great presentation, thank you. I was wondering, you talked about onboarding a human engineer takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take to onboard this guy? Like, what did you have to do to feed the beast to make it productive for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually think it's way easier onboarding Resolve than a human engineer, because a human engineer needs, at least myself, a lot of iterations over the knowledge to really get it to stick. What we had to do, and Chris in the audience actually did this firsthand, so he'd be a great person to speak to afterwards. We had to build a knowledge graph because everything in Zscaler is bespoke. If we ask Resolve a question about our infrastructure, it doesn't know what ZS1 is. It doesn't know the terminology of all our applications. And so the knowledge graph we built is a way of feeding knowledge, some contextual knowledge into Resolve. And then there's some org mapping so we can steer Resolve to which service. So when we say this name of a service, it's this org and this data. There's also all our documentation and all of that stuff we fed Resolve. But it wasn't very time consuming. It was fairly straightforward for us. We know the information up front, so we can just document it in an empty file, give it to Resolve. If it's wrong, we can replay it. We can generate that knowledge graph again and again. So it was a fairly straightforward activity for us.
Chris, is there any examples you might like to share with us specifically about maybe something you built into an MD or how you corrected Resolve and what you fed it?
Sure, I can add some color. So I could even add a little bit of color to that in terms of the onboarding process for Resolve versus a human. A lot of the material that you are providing to Resolve, Duncan mentioned the knowledge graph, which is a very technical asset. That did frankly take some effort. It was effort that honestly we should have spent ahead of time having such a knowledge graph ready. So yes, we invested effort there, but it was sort of a step that we had skipped 10 years ago. Additionally, a lot of that effort that you say spent onboarding Resolve with say textual knowledge and knowledge about your domain, you're giving it to Resolve more or less once, when I would have been giving it to each and every individual engineer that I would be onboarding in perpetuity. So that investment into Resolve, it could feel like a bit, but just keep in mind that it's one time, or at least closer to one time than it would be with human resources in some cases.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions for Duncan or Chris, since we have a dynamic duo here from Zscaler?
Somewhere at the back.
Watch me run. You don't have to watch me run. Oh, thanks for meeting me in the middle.
Hi, great presentation. It's my first time here at Resolve, and I was wondering, it's just a general question, outside of just incident resolution, is there something that Resolve can do beforehand, before anything goes into production, to maybe mitigate some common issues or resolve some common issues before they occur?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it comes down to how you want to use Resolve. So we would like to plug it into our CI/CD pipeline. And that means as we have metrics for what we deploy to effectively a staging environment, Resolve can absolutely be looking at all of that and then give an indication that something should change, something should roll back because we've seen a change that's unintended. But also just the back and forth interaction with Resolve's chat feature. And like today, I asked a really broad question. Is there anything up with prod over the last 48 hours? And it came back with what looked like some terrifying kind of answers, like there's 485 alerts, and your Redis database may be on fire, and your Nginx has seen a lack of traffic. So I asked Resolve, are any of these important? Should I be concerned? And Resolve did some more analysis and said, actually, on the Nginx side, don't be concerned. Traffic's flowing really well. It's just your thresholds aren't configured correctly. And so going back to my 400,000 alerts, it's giving me an indication through that chat feature that there's more I can do on the configuration side to actually make production more rigorous, make alerts more actionable. And so I think it largely comes down into how you want to interact with Resolve and where in your workflow does it fit as to what it can do. But the short answer is yes, I think it can do way more than incident response. It can actually help as you interact with production on a daily basis.
Anyone else with a question? Maybe on the side? Yes, thank you.
So you described a pretty complex architecture spanning multiple clouds and kind of a very heterogeneous stack. Are there any particular kinds of issues, classes of issues where you found the tool to do better and any where you found it to kind of still struggle, for example, networking issues or a specific kind of category of issues where it's doesn't perform as well?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, you get some things out of the box, like I believe Resolve understands how to traverse a Kubernetes environment. So there's a class of things that seem way easier from the get-go. Because our environment is all bespoke, we had to build the knowledge graph. And so making sure the knowledge graph is accurate is important. In terms of issues, I would say broadly, as long as you can give meaningful data, meaningful telemetry, like your metrics, logs, and traces to Resolve, and Resolve understands the vernacular of your system, at that point, Resolve can do something meaningful for you. So as to whether like networking issues versus, say, DB issues, I haven't seen anything material in terms of one being better than the other. But Chris, you've spent more time with it.
You highlighted it. Thank you. Hot potato microphone here. The one thing that is definitely important is the quality, both quality and quantity of telemetry that is emitted per service. As that quality and quantity decreases, whatever that thing is, just like it would be more difficult for a human to respond to, the same thing goes to agents. They aren't magicians. The better the telemetry is from a system, the better results you're going to have. If you have that, then networking, systems, applications, all of that falls into line nicely.
Any other questions?
Sorry, just one more thing on that last thing. The other
please.
thing to think about would be your symptom-based and cause-based alerting. So if you have common symptoms with a number of different faults, I think Resolve would have more things to traverse through, just like a human would, as opposed to if you've got a symptom and a cause which are tightly correlated, it's going to very quickly find the answer.
Thank you for presentation. That's impressive. I suppose Zscaler has a lot of engineers to build our solution. So have you ever thought of building AI with building that's kind of solution like ResolveAI yourself?
That's an excellent question, and it depends on the person. There's many people in Zscaler who love AI and are building some variant, some sort of edge case, like agentic AI capability, some for supporting prod. When I look at what Resolve can do across the spectrum, it's very hard to replicate everything that Resolve is doing. And so we started, like some folks in my team actually built like a Gemini bot to sit in the bridge and summarize what's going on, very similar to like incident management tooling. So going after one vector with some smart engineers, I think is possible. Keeping up with all the evolution of what's going into the product is challenging. And the other thing I'd think about is when you think about building your own system, the building piece isn't the hardest part. As Stephen showed earlier, you've got the build and then this big circle for running in production. The ongoing maintenance and keeping parity with where the industry is going is really challenging. So you need to invest either in people or in product to actually keep up with the changes there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any final questions? I guess to add a little color, to let you into what we talk about inside our HQ, sometimes we talk about the fact that Resolve, we want it to feel magical, but really the magic comes from the way that people share their knowledge and train it. And then it actually is just powerful, but not necessarily magical. It's a powerful tool that feels magical when you begin to use it and train it the way that you all have that Zscaler. So thank you.
Thank you.